Mass production of gasifier vehicles emerged thanks to the French military, who experienced World War I and the lack of liquid fuel the hard way. When Hitler came to power, Germany took the baton, and all for the same reason: an acute shortage of oil during World War II. World War II was the first war in history where engines were massively used. Whereas horses had been used for warfare earlier, Hitler staked on a blitzkrieg, so the troops were motorized as much as possible. All fuel was to be sent to the front. The army devoured colossal amounts of liquid fuel. According to some assessments, 15 million tons of liquid hydrocarbons were burned just monthly. Germany and captured countries, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Alsace, and Poland, produced only 1.3 million tons of fuel per month in 1940. Synthetic gasoline made according to the Fischer-Tropsch method and gasifiers from German lignite yielded 4.4 million tons per month in the same 1940. That's why all Tiger and other tanks were also gasoline-powered. Totally 5.7 million tons of gas were produced per month, and 2.3 million tons were imported. An acute fuel shortage forced to take all the gasoline from civilians in the rear to the front. All cars, tractors, and trucks had to run on firewood, charcoal, briquettes, etc. The Germans simply forced all the countries they conquered to switch to gasifier vehicles, although the people were not really keen on this idea. The cunning Italians tried to drive on gasoline but switched to firewood before German checkpoints. The Germans prepared for the introduction of gasifiers in advance. The Munich Technical Driving School trained 10,558 gasifier transport drivers in May 1940 to September 1, 1941. By the time the Germans captured France, Imbert's company was confiscated, and the inventor was forced to work there as an ordinary employee, although he considered himself a German patriot. In contrast, Linaborn, who had bought the rights to produce gasifiers in Germany, immensely expanded his business. However, the Germans took Linaborn into their hands after a short period as well. Due to an acute shortage of liquid fuel, Göring decided to establish a central gasifier point on May 30, 1942, and 30 different gasifier models were tested 2 times in 1943 to select one for mass production. And once again, the Imbert gasifier won and became an ideological symbol of the German people's resilience. In 1944, Imbert personally received the cross from Hitler for making one type of gasifier for mass production. Many companies had produced gasifiers in their own way before that. The press called Imbert the Holzgaspapst gasifiers father the same year. Germany began to develop a network of firewood fueling stations, warehouses located at a certain distance apart like regular gas stations today. There were about 2,000 of them, planned to be 3,000. In the Soviet Union, by the way, the same stations were placed every 60 kilometers. Workers deported from the occupied countries worked at the Imbert Köln plant. In 1941, the UK went back to gasifiers and tried to introduce coal-powered public buses like Germany in Europe. The UK historically had plenty of coal. 25 buses rode in London until 1943 and were abandoned because of whatever reason. Although in 1939 there were 1,500 gas-powered buses on the roads of the parent country. Like it or not, convenient or not, it was necessary to move around, and already by the middle of World War II, 10,000 gasifiers were on the roads. Brands of British gasifiers were Hans, Coster, Coel, HSG, Benford, Dupuy, and Dagmar Jones. Basically, they all ran on coal and charcoal. The Germans also used Imbert gasifiers for military vehicles. To save liquid fuel, gasifiers were put on tanks in tank driving schools. Panzer II tanks, that had accounted for 38% of Germany's tank fleet, became obsolete in 1943. Turrets were removed from them to train tank crews. Panzer III was also used for training. These tanks were heavier and consumed more fuel. Apparently, gasifiers were not installed on them, at least I could only find a photo with compressed illuminating gas cylinders. It was not allowed to go to the front with gas cylinders as they would explode from the first hit. The same compressed illuminating gas cylinders were also used on the Panzer IV. Panthers copied from T-34 also rode with compressed illuminating gas cylinders in tank schools. Training Tigers with removed turrets also rode with illuminating gas cylinders. Panzer 38 tank chassis was used for self-propelled guns and artillery. Gasifiers were installed to save on gasoline on a shooting range. At the same time, semi-tracked SD, KFZ .251 infantry vehicles rode with gasifiers also at the front. According to unverified reports, American pilots saw a Tiger II with gasifiers by the end of the war. Equipped with a 22-liter gasoline engine, they would burn about 1 cubic meter of wood per hour. In my opinion, hardly anyone would want to load 1 cubic meter of firewood by hand every hour. The Wehrmacht had a total of 500 combat vehicles and about 12 Panthers with gasifiers. Never before or since has gasifier transport flourished so much as it did during World War II. 75% of all transport on the planet ran on solid fuel using gasifiers. About 1 million units. The Umberto Company produced about 500,000 gasifiers in 4 years, from 1941 to 1945. The German division of Ford began producing firewood-powered buses with Umberto gasifiers. Ford was located next to Umberto. WWII, MAN, Mercedes, Sauer, Henschel, Busing, and NAG trucks, tractors, motorcycles, and even small mopeds were produced. Masses of ships and trains ran on firewood. Everything that had an engine ran on firewood in the rear. At that time, there were about 100 companies in the world making gasifiers for anything that moved. All public transport worldwide got gasifiers. But this didn't happen in the US. It only exported gasifiers. Apparently, it had no problem with liquid fuel. When converted to generator gas, gasoline engines immediately lose 35% of power and diesel engines lose 20%. However, that didn't prevent loading buses to the brim. The cartoon caption reads, "How could one say that gasifiers are low-powered?" Hitler forced the whole of Europe to switch to firewood and forced car manufacturers to make only gasifier cars, tractors, etc. For example, Louis Renault was forced to give in to the Nazis and produce tens of thousands of transport gasifiers, including about 32,877 for the Germans. The shortage was very acute. Wehrmacht armored troops General Guderian and General Hopner, who led the 4th Armored Group involved in capturing Moscow, reported a 50% shortage of fuel for their armored vehicles, which were not even fully assembled. The Chief of Staff of the Army High Command Halder was 35% short of fuel. The Chief of Army Group South, the gifted strategist Manstein, was 30% short of fuel. All this shortage led Hitler to Stalingrad. The city of Baku, which knew no war or trouble, supplied fuel for the Soviet army. Hitler was short of the oil taken from all of Europe, then he was short of the oil taken from Romania. He wanted to get even Baku oil. To avoid encircling, the Nazis had to first take Stalingrad, where the backbone of fascism was broken in 1942, as we know. After that, the Germans were only retreating. The war required so much fuel that hundreds of thousands of gasifiers that saved it were no more helpful. Umberto alone had produced 500,000 gasifiers. And there was a total of about 1 million gasifier vehicles in operation in Europe. Europe's rear saved Hitler 45 million liters of gasoline each month after transiting to gasifiers. Fuel was procured on an industrial scale. The video shows a Lapland plant in 1942 producing charcoal for transverse gasifiers the Wehrmacht, and also the rear, were fond of. Quick start, no tar, no smoke, no smell, and easy handling made these gasifiers popular. In May of the same year, Hitler's friend and Germany's chief Forster Goering, who supervised gasifiers, said, "I am talking about the necessity of making Germany, as well as the occupied territories and subordinate lands, to a large extent, independent of liquid fuel as soon as possible. I would ask you to vigorously support the efforts of the Central Office by the increased use of gasifiers."
На братских могилах не ставят крестов, и вдовы на них не рыдают. К ним кто-то приносит букеты цветов, и вечный огонь зажигают. Здесь раньше вставала земля на дыбы, а нынче гранитные плиты. Здесь нет ни одной персональной судьбы, все судьбы в единую слиты. А в вечном огне видишь вспыхнувший там горящие русские хаты, горящий Смоленск и горящий Рейхстаг, горящее сердце солдата. У братских могил нет заплаканных вдов, Сюда ходят люди покрепче, на братских могилах не ставят крестов. Но разве от этого легче?
In 1944, the Americans took Sayre, the town where Imbert had the chalet and the gasifier factory. He was not arrested. His factory just passed into Ford ownership. Not so long ago, Imbert considered himself a German patriot and a nationalist with a quarrelsome character. He received the highest award from Hitler himself. Now he became a nobody. He lost interest in life. Besides, his son was killed on the Eastern Front. He blamed himself and eventually drank himself to death in 1950 at the age of 66. There was no more need to save fuel after the end of the war, so there was also no more need for gasifiers. The demand subsided. In January 1949, Imbert Koln fired 550 workers, and in 1952, the factory closed its doors for good despite retraining efforts. The cheap oil that flooded the market killed the gasifiers.